The fishbone stitch gets its name because of the pattern that the threads make as they come together. And it is made by it is used to fill in a large area of space by dividing it in half. And then I'm going to fill in each half simultaneously, working back and forth as I work my way down. So this is going to be a leaf. And what I need to do first is I need to divide this leaf in half and draw the line that I want. It does not have to be exactly straight. It can be nice and curved, and that's part of what makes the fishbone stitch a little bit fun. It's a way to give almost a bit of a 3D effect with some body. So I'm going to draw this curve here, and you can see there, and that's going to be the line that cuts this big space into half. And to begin now, I'm going to start at the top of my leaf. I'm going to anchor my thread down. And you don't have to do this first step, but I think it really makes a difference in helping your stitch work to come out very nicely. So let me get my needle up here at the top. I like to begin by actually running a quick stitch, just a very big, loose, basted type of stitch down following this middle line. This initial stitch is going to be completely hidden in the finished work, but it's going to help make that finished work follow that curve very, very nicely. So I'm going to just come down, make a big long stitch there. And then I'm going to just, along the back, I don't need to skip a whole lot. I'm going to just skip a little bit and then pop back, do sort of a very sloppy back stitch here. And then come back up right there. And then keep going, nice long big stitch down like that. Again, I'm going to skip just a few threads to make a small little back stitch right here. I'm going to go back. And I'm going to come right back up where that green line ends. I'm going to work my way. I have to make these threads a little bit shorter as I make my way around the curve because I want it to be a nice smooth curve. And it doesn't need to be 100% perfect because, like I said, this initial stitch is going to be hidden when you're all finished. It's just really a guide for the stitch work you're ultimately going to finish. So now, one thing I did is I want to think about which way I want the diagonals of my fishbone stitch to go. Now in this case, my diagonals are going to go down, sloping off this way on this side, and they're going to be sloping this way over on this side. So they're going to kind of go like that, and like that, and like that, and like that, if you can kind of see what I've drawn there. So you want to start at the top of if you think of these as being little arrows, the direction the arrow is pointing, that's the top of where we're going to start our fishbone stitch. So when you start that first initial stitch, begin it at the bottom, down, and you're going to work your way in the direction that those arrows are pointing. That way, when you finish that guideline, you're ready to roll, you're ready to start your actual fishbone stitch right up at the top where you're supposed to. So your first fishbone stitch has actually now already been made. It's going to be that first stitch that goes right up the middle right there. Then what I want to do is I want to bring my needle up on one side of that initial first stitch. And it's going to come up along either this line here that I've drawn on the outside of this shape, or it's going to come up along this line here that I've drawn along the outside of this shape. So I'm going to start over on this side. I'm going to bring my needle up right there. And it's almost a little bit like the way you would do a satin stitch. You're going to come just a few fibers over. If you don't already know how to do the satin stitch, I recommend you go watch that video and then come back and watch this video again because it will actually help you with this video. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to put my needle down on the opposite side of my guide stitch that I had made a little ways down. So it's going to make that little diagonal shape. Now I'm going to come back up and I'm going to come up on this side over here, the left side of my guideline. And I'm going to go flip to the opposite side. And now I'm going, so I came up on the left. I'm going to go down on the right, down here. Now I'm going to bounce back up and I'm going to come up on the right, a little further down, just a few threads down, come up on the right, go down on the left. And when it goes, so when it comes up, it's coming up on the pencil line that I have drawn. When it goes down, it's going down, hugging this green guideline that I have stitched. So I'm going to go down right there. So I went down on the right. I'm going to come up on the left, a little bit further down. Again, a lot like a satin stitch, but this time is sort of alternating back and forth. Up on the left, down on the right. And these first few stitches are going to be continuing to alternate like this. And the first few are going to be really going almost straight down because you're going to need a real sharp diagonal to get this nice narrow area here that I have filled in. But as the leaf body starts to widen out, I'm going to need to change the directions of those stitches a little bit. So like I said, on the satin stitch video, if you go and watch that, it talks a little bit about how to kind of change the direction of your stitches a little bit. You'll do the same method where I just throw in a little bit of a short stitch and then I make a longer stitch again that folds over my short stitch. Like I said, that's shown in more detail on the satin stitch video. And that helps me to then start to bring those angles out a little bit more. So up on the left, down on the right, then up on the right, down on the left. I'm going to continue to work this way as I continue to go down to fill in the space here. And you know what you'll start to see as I work further and further down this shape is that it's starting to make that kind of fishbone look with the way that the stitches are folding over each other. Now, once again, I've reached a point where my diagonals are starting to become a little too sharp. I want them to sort of be more this angle. So I'm gonna throw in a couple quick stitches. You know, these are the ones that I mentioned are on the satin stitch video. So I'm gonna throw in a little short stitch, come up on the right, and I'm still going to go down on the right because I'm going to make a little bit of a shorter stitch, and then I'm going to come up on the right again, and then this time I'm going to cross over and go down on the left. So that's just that little way of turning your corner a little bit. That's a satin stitch technique. And I'm going to turn the corner on this side too now. So up on the left, I'm going to go down on the left with a little bit of a shorter stitch, and now I'm going to go up on the left again, and then I'm going to go down on the right. That helps me turn that corner a little bit. And I'm going to do that a couple times in a row for each of these. Now I'm going to turn the corner more on the right. So there's my short stitch on the right. And then there's my longer stitch on the right. And now I'm going to cross over. And that helps me turn that corner. Now I'm on the left again. Make a little bit of a shorter stitch on the left. Up on the left, down on the left with a short stitch. And then up on the left again. And now down on the right to help make it around that corner a little bit. And I just continue like this along to the end. I'm continuing to work my way along here. I'm almost to the end. A couple little pointers to think about here. Much like with the satin stitch, it's always a good idea to make sure you're coming up just outside those outer guidelines, not inside or on them, because you want to make sure any lines you have drawn on your fabric don't end up showing on your finished work. You don't want any of that permanent ink or marks you may have made still being visible. Another thing to think about that's very important with the fishbone stitch that's a little different than the satin stitch is how important it is not to let your stitches bunch together too closely. You know, with the satin stitch, if your stitches end up on top of each other a little bit, it's not perfect, but no one's really going to notice. It's not going to be a big problem. With the fishbone stitch, on the other hand, because you're really going for this nice pattern with the crisscross of the stitches, if your stitches end up bunching up too much, that will actually affect the way the pattern lies on the fabric. So it's important to make sure you're not letting those things get too close. Now, as I get to the end here, I'm going to need to start changing the angle again. So I'm going to come out a little bit longer, a little further down. And so up on the right, still down on the left, but you'll see I'm coming down almost close to that end there. And there's a spot where I feel like I left a little too much gap. So this isn't perfect, but I'm just going to let there be 2 stitches in the row here along the end. At that point, the end doesn't need to be 100% perfect. And sometimes I even just stop fishboning at that point and I just turn it into a little bit of a satin stitch right on those last couple stitches. That's sometimes a nicer way to finish it off. You don't have to. Some people like to make the fishbone stitch go all the way to the end. But that's it right there. And then in this case, I'm just going to finish off my thread by running it underneath my fishbone stitch work like that. And I am all finished.